This is a powerful
We're
new
going
concept.
to revolutionize
It's
this
really
business
all
where
about
we
data
want to
collection and analysis.
We need to have an
Fresh
active
ideas
voice.
are what we
A
really
passive
need.
voice won't get us where we want to go.
You are listening to Active Voice with your host Llewellyn King. Our guest today is Chase Weir.
Hello, I'm Llewellyn King, the host of Active Voice. This is a program which aims to introduce you to exceptional people with exceptional ideas that will affect life going forward. And I'm very glad today to have what I consider a truly exceptional person as my guest. He is Chase Weir. He is the founder and CEO of Distributed Sun and truCurrent, and of an environmental organization called Earthshot. And it is a pleasure to have him with me today. Chase, you have published what I consider an extraordinary article in Forbes on illiquidity in the electric market. And it's addressed as called Kilowatt Hour Illiquidity and the New Currency of Competitiveness. It looks at electricity analogously with the way markets work, the way money operates. Would you like to explain to us how that is true and what we can do going forward to bring liquidity to the electric sphere?
I do think that we have a defining problem with our electricity grid and our economy today. And this thesis that was recently published in Forbes was informed by me listening to over 200 grid novices and nerds, geeks and gurus, a lot of PhDs and economists over the past 12 months talking about our electricity grid, how we generate, how we transmit, how we distribute and manage loads. And there are a lot of topics in play, and people try to think about our electricity grid in silos. But the common theme I was hearing was the kilowatt hour. And that thesis about kilowatt hour liquidity or illiquidity, I think, is essential for both experts and lay people to understand what we're confronting today. I've wrote a companion piece, Llewellyn, about non-zero. And I think that beginning there helps us understand what I mean to say. And that is that when societies operate in and around abundance, originally natural abundance, and had sufficient calories, then society grew and thrived. People weren't focused on survival, and there was an overabundance of calories. My thesis, and I don't think it's really my thesis, is that the kilowatt hour is indistinguishable from calories today, but it's indistinguishable from several other things, from mechanical work and labor, from computing power, processing power, thinking, and it is a unit of capital. And so understanding this fungibility of the kilowatt hour in this environment today, where we're facing extraordinary load growth from AI and data centers, automation, electrification, new manufacturing loads, is fundamental to policy making, good business decision making, and that's the thesis.
One of the subheads in your thesis is that the grid was never designed for liquidity. The grid is remarkably rigid, isn't it?
It is, Llewellyn. The grid was a remarkable machine designed for another century. And the physics of how our original grid works is one directional, from central generation through transmission lines down to distribution grids. And today, that's not how kilowatt hours, that's not how smart electrons, that's not how a smart grid wants to and prefers to function. Today, kilowatt hours are trapped in time and place by physical bottlenecks and by regulation. And the premise of kilowatt hour liquidity is that this is no longer just a policy issue. This is a market competitiveness, business competition issue. And it's easy to understand if you think about cash and cash liquidity. We all understand what it means to have enough cash on hand to make payroll. People who manage budgets and P&Ls understand what it means to go over budget. What we don't understand is the kilowatt hour serves that same function. And if a business is trying to grow, they typically need new electrons. And in the environment that we're in today, utilities, while they recognize this, and certainly utilities like Xcel in Minnesota with distributed capacity procurement and PG&E out in California with their Flex Connect program, are beginning to understand how essential it is to unlock and unbound the kilowatt hour. But those are two rate territories in a vast country. And this machine that we are, frankly, just like we're stewards of our environment, we're custodians of our grid. And so those who are applied practitioners, those who are developers, large loads, utilities, policymakers, need to understand that the physics of the grid today needs to be bidirectional, polydirectional in order to unlock this opportunity. Today, and I think you know this well, and this is not a conversation that I'm originating here, but we have real limits on the ability to get new power. It's not just a speed to power, it's available power. It's the ability to use power when you want to and when you need to. And kilowatt hour liquidity's premise is that energy assets, distributed energy assets, serve the function of unlocking the kilowatt hour, unbounding the electron.
Now, when you say distributed assets, what are you including in that? Are you including self-generators, rooftop solar, economies of usage, forced outages? What is included in distributed generation in your mind, Chase?
When we think about distributed generation, the easiest way to understand it is in contrast to centralized generation. So in the world that we grew up in, Llewellyn, we had large nuclear power plants, coal plants, natural gas plants, gigawatt scale and greater, that would serve a distribution grid. And in moments of whether it be weather related or a surge of demand, another effectively centralized power plant called a peak power plant would come online to serve that surge. In the environment we're in today, new loads are bound by this old school calculus that one day a year, typically within a certain few hours, there's a lack of capacity. And therefore, anybody doing new planning for a new load is bound to the limits of that one day or 2 days. In some instances, it's 5 days a year. And that essentially is the problem with the central system. When you get to the site of a manufacturing plant or a large load, we now have new technologies. They're solar panels, they're batteries, they're linear generators. And effectively together, they become microgrids. And this is the premise. And again, to the kilowatt hour metaphor and the liquidity metaphor, when you put a solar system on site, not all sites can accommodate solar, but many do. And when you put that on site, and I think this is also essential to understand, that solar modules have useful lives of 25 to 30 plus years. And when you turn them on, they act like a printing press. Every day that the sun shines, photons become electrons, and there's no incremental cost. There's no incremental fuel resource input cost for that. That's why I call that a printing press, but I'm just trying to help us understand what we mean by liquidity. There is energy being generated on site independently, distributed at the grid edge. not miles and miles away from a central plant.
When you're talking about solar, are you thinking in terms of widely distributed rooftop solar, or as we see increasingly, utility scale solar farms and installations?
Llewellyn, I have two development platforms. One is called truCurrent, one is called Distributed Sun. We founded Distributed Sun 16 years ago, and at Distributed Sun, we've built solar of every type for every potential customer. We've built it on roofs, we've built it over parking lots, we've built the iconic solar canopies above the Bloomberg and the Tata Center at Cornell Tech in New York City. And we've built very large scale utility and then multi-megawatt community solar on the ground. And we've done that today now in 17 states. I would describe most of what we do at Distributed Sun as front of the meter, serving the transmission or the distribution grid on the other side of what we call the customer fence. When we get behind the customer fence, now it's distributed, now it's on site. And obviously in urban areas, you're stuck largely to the rooftop. But I know you also know that there are businesses that are bringing large loads to power, data centers that are being sited next to available land to build very large scale solar. But that solar is still largely, in that instance, behind the meter, even though you might be getting into the tens and the hundreds of megawatts.
You mentioned microgrids, that is actually what you install and how you bring about liquidity. But not all electric utilities are enthusiastic about microgrids. When I asked the president of one large utility, he said, "What is it about the word micro that they don't understand? It doesn't apply to us." In other words, that he was committed to large installations and had very little confidence that microgrids could make a difference.
Well, microgrids are making a difference in a lot of places in a lot of very essential ways. I'll just give you an example. There's so many different ways to tack at this. I mean, I began to talk about that non-zero thesis, that principle of designing systems where all the counterparties win. And that's not necessarily a noble principle. I think it is. But if you're designing systems and deploying energy where in the rearview mirror, when the dust settles, there are losers, that's probably not a system that you're going to scale. Certainly not scale with a social mandate and social trust. You might obtain it for a minute, but you won't maintain it over time. And then I think when we get into kilowatt hour liquidity, what's good for the goose is good for the gander. The problem the customer is experiencing behind their fence is the same problem for the utility. But when you look at the energy risks that everybody's confronting, the problems and the friction that every new large load that would look to bring more kilowatt hours to an existing site, they confront very common problems. It doesn't matter if they're trying to electrify a fleet or automate a facility or build a brand new facility. They need new load. And we have a very strained grid, and those utility executives know that. So when they're told they can't have power because there's not enough capacity on the nearby circuit or the point of common interconnection, they're typically being told they can't have power because of a policy or a regulatory constraint, an integrated resource planning decision that hasn't been taken, data standards, or the ability for the utility to actually control that on-site resource. But technology today has overcome that. So when we confront these issues, when we have a customer that says, if I cannot bring more kilowatt hours to this site, I can't grow. I might shut this site down, but I'm definitely not going to do what I want to do, what I need to do to manage and grow and compete in the marketplace. We come in and engage with the utility, engage with the customer, and we just know that microgrids in many of these instances are the solution. And when they're done right, the customer wins, the utility wins, the developer wins, the non-participating ratepayer wins, the taxpayer wins, and the economy wins. And lo and behold, when you're doing clean energy in the mix, the environment wins. So let me define those problems. So if I can't have power because the utility cannot serve it to me, but I have addressable space on site to build solar, then the premise that I can't have new power is a false premise, right? So as a customer with energy choice, I can choose to put solar on site. But now I'm dealing with a rate design. I'm dealing with a bill of charges for how I currently get my electricity. And I'm dealing with a cost book and I'm dealing with formulas on how to optimize so I can have the power that I need at a reasonable cost. So what we do is we bring in that new power and we bring it in quickly. So that's a different answer than that customer is getting from the utility. And we do that by combining assets, a symphony, an orchestra of assets, not just solar, but we bring in battery storage. And when you combine the two of that, now you have an ability to have flexible loads, meaning I'm able to draw from the grid or I'm able to draw from the battery. I'm able to generate power on site and my options expand. So my ability to have new power, use it when I want to, use it how I want to, at a lower total cost of ownership, and have assets there at the grid edge that are of value to the utilities grid, meaning we can provide services to that grid. These are real tractable problems that people, policy, process, and politics slows the uptake of us understanding that.
Do you offer your services directly to corporations that need more power and not necessarily through the utility?
Indeed, we do. So we serve utilities and we serve large loads. So um, we serve power to utilities across the country through distributed sun, and we serve power across the country behind the meter to large loads through truCurrent.
That's interesting. Can we explore non-zero? You've mentioned it a couple of times.
Sure.
Generally, there is an environmental movement which has sort of assumed that net zero is the way to go, applying to carbon in the atmosphere. Explain your attitude.
I'd be happy to, Llewellyn. And let me first say that the premise of non-zero is not a response to net zero. And I have no particular axe to grind today or on tour about net zero other than this. Net zero as your compass, as your singular motivation, means that you're making incredibly complex decisions that impact a lot of different stakeholders on the premise of fewer parts per million. That's very prescriptive and very singular. And I've been thinking about non-zero for 25 years since I read Robert Wright's book. It just struck me as a kind of a universal truth about how good society forms. And we all get this when we hear it, right? The persons that lived thousands of years ago in the Pacific Northwest of the United States were living in an incredibly naturally abundant place. They didn't struggle to find water or food, and that helped them build shelter with a lot more calories. And they had an abundance of what they needed. And when people have an abundance of their needs met, they're not surviving. They're not deciding, I get to eat or you get to eat. I get to drink or you get to drink. They're not building zero-sum systems, right? Winners and losers. And Robert Wright's premise was that societies that take root in abundance begin to create more win-win relationships. And you start to see sophistication take root. And people get into the arts and they get into the humanities. And we see the corollary, we see the opposite of that saying. If you live in places that barely have enough water and have no food or have no forest cover to build with, um, you you are confronted with the wins and the losses in many more transactions, and then those people form themselves and their societies and their institutions around zero-sum rules. And so there's a big difference, and we know, between surviving and thriving. And thriving, as a general rule, can be rooted back to transactions that predominate within a culture that are more win-win than they are win-loss. And when you extend that premise to electricity in our grid, every one of those metaphors, every single one of those analogs translates. There's a translation, just like there is for kilowatt hour liquidity. And that's why I think those are two companion theses. One is a principle for design. The other one is understanding that just like we look at currency, fiat currency, to be fungible to, say, bullion or to crypto or to all the different types of cash instruments, the kilowatt hour is equally fungible and frankly indiscernible from currency. I would say that it's the base currency. So I think it's the collision of these two and a third that I'm about to publish that defines how we think. Defining how we think is one thing, but the next question is, how do we act, right? And how we're acting as we're executing with in across asset classes. And we don't come in with a one size fits all, because these solutions and their combinations and how you optimize to a rate tariff and then how you would monetize those assets on behalf of the customer and the utility, they change from jurisdiction to jurisdiction. But the commonalities, that's the key. There are now more and more commonalities that I think we're seeing are becoming the standard in the better way. And even these utility executives that are resisting this still want to find a solution to positively contribute to it. I think we all know that we live in the house that Enron built, and that utilities have an incentive to deploy more capital, not to deploy more into more efficient operations and investing in the technologies that make their grid smarter. The incentive is to deploy more capital because they get a regulated rate of return. That's very inefficient. But if you present scenarios where utilities can own the assets that we know how to build at the grid edge, then they have a better grid and they're delivering more kilowatt hours. And so the local economy is growing and they're making more money. These are not secrets. I'll just say again, people, process, policy, and politics, there's a lot of inertia that gets in the way of change. But these are inevitable. And this thesis that I put out there is me listening to what others are saying. And now I'm hearing that people are reading this and hearing this. And once you see it, you can't unsee this.
We're coming towards the end of our time together here. And I plan that you should come back, and I hope you will. But tell us a little bit about Earthshot. There are not many people in the power industry who can claim to have founded an environmental organization. What is Earthshot, and what does it do, and how did you come to found it?
Llewellyn Earthshot Foundation was established in 2008 after a little speed bump that we had in the global economy. Gave me an opportunity to ask a question to myself that I've now learned I try to ask almost on an annual basis. What do I want to do when I grow up? And because of that unexpected intervention from the 2008 financial crisis, I really asked that question for the first time in a very serious way in my professional career after I had launched Probably I was in my third or my fourth venture that got interrupted by that situation. And I was at Aspen Institute with 18 strangers reading 3,000 years of literature is what we were discussing. And I had an aha moment that all of those books were really about good society, from Confucius and Mencius all the way through Locke and Hobbes, and it's all the same book. And it was there at Aspen Institute that I decided to launch the Earthshot Foundation, whose defining principles are about protecting and preserving our natural capital. And even then, and at that moment, I knew that that was about the collision of how we extract resources and how we act as custodians of this one planet that we have through the lens of energy. Energy and our energy systems are one of the largest sources of demand to extract from our planet. We all know that we either grow it or we extract it. And the extractive industries in our energy industry are virtually the same thing. And we see it today with the great resource competition around critical minerals and rare earths. And frankly, economies that have large labor forces and economies that have lots of kilowatt hours have a lot more to say with how we use those resources. I don't know how we protect and preserve our natural capital if we don't get our energy system right. So Earthshot was founded in 2008, and today we're applying that in our dialogues. And maybe on another occasion, I can tell you about what we did last year with mining and what we're doing this year with the grid.
Chase Weir, entrepreneur, environmentalist, and philosopher. Thank you for joining me on Active Voice.
Thank you, Llewellyn.